I was one of the last guys cut from the team. I remember it was traumatic because I knew I could play. There's no doubt in my mind.
You might know James Brown, also known as JB, as host of the NFL Today on CBS. But in the mid-1970s, he was trying to become a pro basketball player with the Atlanta Hawks.
When the coach, Cotton Fitzsimmons, called me up to his room to let me know that he was going to let me go, and I broke down and cried like a baby because I knew I could play, and the person he was keeping in my place, I felt that I was a better player and probably team contributor than this guy.
We've been humbled to our knees. From these ruins we believe. Oh, oh, oh.
During that time in his coach's office, James Brown learned a hard lesson, and he's going to share it on this episode of GPS, God, People, Stories. I'm Jim Kirkland.
And I'm Phil Fleischman. James Brown has had to learn how to balance fame and his walk with Christ. Billy Graham had to do the same. And a little later in this episode, you'll hear comments Billy Graham made when accepting a star along the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
Yes, this is a star. But the Bible teaches there's only one real star, and he's the King of Kings and the very God of very gods and the Prince of Peace.
Jesus is called the Prince of Peace because he can flood your soul with a peace that you cannot find anywhere else. We can tell you more at this website, findpeacewithgod.net. That's findpeacewithgod.net.
GPS. God, People, Stories.
My mother and father, God bless them, they have since passed. Married young. My mother was 16. My father was 20. My mom was 16 when she was pregnant, 17 when she had me. But they were very hardworking people. It was awesome to be in a two-parent household. I'm the oldest of 5, 4 boys and 1 girl.
The Brown family lived in the Washington, D.C. area. They weren't involved in church. Now, James' parents did give their lives to Jesus Christ later in their lives. Growing up, though, JB does remember hearing about God on the radio.
It was like a little 5-minute sermonette with some topic of the day, a devotional that really planted a seed in me, though we were not actively engaged in church or had any kind of family devotions.
Something that JB was actively engaged in was basketball.
I was a pretty fair basketball player back in the Washington, D.C. area, having gone to a great school, DeMatha Catholic High School, which was a powerhouse athletic program, solid academic school as well, and had become a high school All-America for 2 years in a row, and had been blessed to be recruited by a number of major colleges. Went to college, but again, was not a man of faith in that I didn't have a relationship with Jesus Christ.
The college JB went to was Harvard, where he graduated with a degree in American government. And he played basketball there well enough to captain the team in his senior year.
It was JB's hope to play professionally, and he almost did.
When I got cut by the Atlanta Hawks, I was one of the last guys cut from the team. I remember it was traumatic because I knew I could play. There's no doubt in my mind. Pete Maravich and Lou Hudson, one of the team stars with Pete Maravich, they were encouraging me, saying, wow, man, you've got a nice game. Just continue to keep your nose to the grindstone and things will work out. And it wasn't, a couple of days later when the coach, Cotton Fitzsimmons, called me up to his room to let me know that he was going to let me go. And I broke down and cried like a baby because I knew I could play. And the person he was keeping in my place, I felt that I was a better player and probably team contributor than this guy. And when I went back home, I hid in the house for about 2 weeks, afraid and ashamed to show my face out to my friends because I knew I could play. And while many of my friends tried to say, oh, you know what, the coach showed favoritism in keeping this guy and you should have been there, I knew enough of the word to know that in the example used in the Bible about pointing a finger of blame, trying to make an excuse for why I didn't make the team, was like pointing out the speck in your brother's eye when there's a plank in your own eye. And I knew then that I had not worked as hard to stay on top as I did to get to the top.
JB thought back to his 4 years at Harvard and how he could have worked harder during that time.
You know, I kind of rested on my laurels, big man on campus, got complacent, all the things that you're not supposed to do. Lessons my high school coach taught us, that players are made in the off season, not during the season, meaning how hard are you willing to work?
Well, after getting cut from the Hawks, JB's answer to that question, how hard are you willing to work, would now always be as hard as it takes.
I have maybe been rightly accused of being a workaholic, but that was my mantra from that point forward, to never allow anybody to outwork me or an opportunity to pass me by that I didn't work hard for.
One of the first beneficiaries of that newfound work ethic was Xerox. JB was a successful salesman for the company. He was working there when he tried out for the Hawks. It wasn't long after he got cut from the Hawks that JB realized he needed to surrender his life to Jesus Christ.
I remember working at Xerox for several months, engaged in hedonistic pursuits, happy hours and the like, young guy tooling around in my little Corvette. And one would think by the world's standards or definitions that, hey, I was starting to gather things, which most people define, a number of people define success by. But I recall driving up Ohlone Road late one evening, coming home from the Xerox Training Center and realizing how empty life was. And perhaps that seed that was planted back in me as an elementary school kid was watered when I had a conversation with God. It might have been one way at that time. I just said, Father, God, if you are, I probably didn't say Father. I said, God, if you are real, would you reveal yourself to me and I will serve you. And I often share the story that the very next week, I go to a party that some friends of mine invited me to. Again, I'm in my early 20s. 24, 25 years of age, and I'm going to a pajama party. Give me a break. And I go to this pajama party, and I felt like I had committed high treason because just a week before I had indicated I wanted to learn more about the Lord.
JB says he profoundly apologized to God, and he describes the decision he made that night to follow Jesus as the best thing that happened in his life.
I'm still flawed. I make my mistakes, but I want overwhelmingly my walk to be that which is reflective of Jesus Christ.
After he'd been with Xerox in Washington, D.C. for a few years, doors began opening up for JB to begin a new career as a sportscaster. He eventually landed at CBS TV, announcing college and pro basketball games. Then, he and his boss wanted him to get experience with other sports like football. So, JB prepared hard for his first game. But it may not have sounded like it.
First game I was given was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers hosting the Atlanta Falcons. And the game, my boss said, James, just call a clean game. Don't try to get fancy. Look at the TV monitor whenever you go to commercial, because the correct time left in the quarter will be on our TV, because sometimes the stadium clock is inaccurate. And just stay clean. Don't get cocky or complacent. So I go through the first half thinking, man, football's not that difficult. Are you kidding me? Their cockiness came into play, if you will, biblically, pride. You got comfortable. So third quarter, I'm calling the action. And I said, Steve DeBerg takes a snap. There's a delayed handoff to James Wilder, the running back. He goes at the 40, the 45. He's got daylight. He's at the 50. Folks, he's heading to pay dirt. He's at the 55.